sort of the follow-up, the ending of the, boy, that's really ringing. The sort of an ending on it seems like so long ago. The first of the month I did a short series on the events of Holy Week.
Right.
And so then I said, okay, well, let's talk about Easter separately. So what we're here to do today is to talk about Easter, what it was, what it probably wasn't. And if you think you're going to leave with all the answers, you may as well leave right now. Okay, all right. So let's pray, and then we'll launch into it. So let's pray.
Today is Easter for all of our Orthodox.
Right, this is Orthodox. Eastern Orthodox is today. Let us pray. Holy God, open now our hearts, I think, more than our minds, so that we can't get it figured out, but Lord, help it to live in our hearts, this message that Christ is alive and that He is in our midst and His Spirit is in our bodies and our hearts. And we pray this in His name. Amen. Okay, so I want to begin. I hope everybody got a copy. Does anybody need handouts? Anybody need one? Okay. What I've done is I just downloaded and photocopied the 4 different Easter stories. I'm hoping everybody knows that there's 4 versions of it in the New Testament, right? There's 4 Gospels. I started with Mark because almost every scholar is convinced that Mark's was the first gospel written, and then I followed him in what they normally believe is the order, the chronological order. So Mark.
It's stapled in Matthew. Matthew.
Oh, I did it wrong. Well, we're going to go with Mark. Does everybody have Mark on top?
Yes.
Okay, I just did send this one. Okay. Anyway, go to Mark. He was supposed to be on top. And what I'm going to do is, and these are not very long, I'm going to read through this just so that we can begin to get it in our heads some of the ideas and the events that are swirling around on the pages of Scripture. So, this is Mark's version. Mark was the first one to write this. By the way, remember, Paul's writings are older than the Gospels. The Gospels were the last things written. So these things were written down, Stephen said, 30, 40 years after the resurrection? Probably 70?
As early as 55. That's the early.
The absolute earliest. That was mostly, yeah. Most people say like 70 or something. Okay. Chapter 16. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices. Why were they bringing spices? It was like embalming. They were embalming. So that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, which would have been our Sunday, that's why we worship on Sunday, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone?" Which was very large. Who will roll away the stone for us from the... I need to put my glasses on, sorry. There we go. From the entrance to the tomb. When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed," which is another word for like fear, right? "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place where they laid him. But go and tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out. They fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And that's where we believe most, I would say, reputable scholars believe the Gospel of Mark ends. There are some other endings on it, but most everyone of any who are good scholars believe that's where it ends, okay? All right, so that's Mark's Gospel. So what happens there? The women go to the tomb. The stone is rolled. They peep inside. They see this, they call him a young man in white. They're afraid, and he just said, "He's not here. Look, he's gone." he'll see you in Galilee as he said. Boom. That's it. That's the oldest account of the Easter story. All right, now let's go to Matthew. So find Matthew's version. Okay, this is a little bit longer. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, so again, Saturday is Sabbath, Sunday is the first day, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. What do you notice already? There's 2 women instead of 3. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord had come down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. So what else do you see here? What's been added?
Guards.
Earthquake and guards. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified." Okay, that sounds familiar. "He is not here, he has risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee." Okay, that sounds pretty much like that. "There you will see him. Now I have told you." Okay, now, going on. So the women hurried away, afraid yet filled with joy, and they ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly, though, Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. And then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So there's this phrase, go to Galilee, go to Galilee. While the women were on their way, some of the guards went into the city, and they reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. When the chief priests had met the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, it's hush money, right? "You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So the soldiers took the money and did as they were instructed. And this story has been widely circulated among the Jews to this very day. All right. Now, go to Luke. Starts out the same, but on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about this, suddenly 2 men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. So it went from 1 to how many? 2. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and on the 3rd day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all of this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. So the number of women grows a little bit more. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, like these crazy women coming here telling us this story. And they did not believe them. But Peter got up, ran to the tomb, stooping and looking in, he saw the linen clothes by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened. Okay, so in that version, no earthquake, no guards, whatever, right? Okay. Now, let's go to the final one, John. This is, I believe, the longest and the most complex. as John almost always is. Okay, ready? Again, early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed. So she ran and went to Simon Peter. So what's already? She ran there. There's no mention that she saw an angel. She ran, looked in, and ran back. Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni." Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. And then from there, it goes into those wonderful stories about doubting Thomas and the room and the scripture. Has anyone ever read these all four together, straight through? You get a feel that they're different, right? There's some aspects of it that are consistent through all four, and then some have a little bit more. Okay, but it does appear that as the tradition developed and as the Gospels were written, more stuff got put in there, more content, more information. Okay, so let me start this way. So when you all were in Sunday school, and anybody see pictures on the wall of Jesus or the empty tomb or any of that sort of stuff? We had some of those. And so what was your first thought? What did it mean that Jesus was alive, that he came out of the tomb, that he was raised from the dead? Any images, or what did you think it meant? John?
Well, it was always because of that perfectly round stone.
Yeah. First of all, it was like
Yeah, which reminds me,
7
I didn't
tons.
say this, but the Flintstones.
I thought the same thing, John. It was huge, and you could like walk
Barbara
around.
Flintstones, like that. You always see that picture of the tomb. It's that weird. Yeah.
But in reality, how large would the stone have probably been?
Well, it would have been a disc, not a big round ball.
Yeah.
And it would have been in a slot.
Yeah.
And it would have rolled like
Like a barn door kind of thing.
kind of,
Well, not
like,
hanging, but it would
like
roll.
a tire in a slot.
Yeah.
But it depends on which one, because even nowadays, you go to Jerusalem and there's the Protestant
There's a Protestant
section.
too.
I've been there.
There's the Roman Catholic section, and there's kind of,
Yeah.
so we can't really agree on what spot
Yeah.
was his.
That's a good point. There's two spots, but the point I'm making is that generally speaking, tombs, what they did was they were inside of little caves, and often bodies were just laid in there and they would rot, sometimes many at a time. And then what would they do once all the meat rotted away? What would they do?
They collected the bones.
They'd collect the bones and put them in a box. Kind of like cremation.
They would reuse the shelf for somebody
And they would reuse it.
Yeah.
And that's why somewhere, doesn't it say somewhere that
a new tomb.
a new tomb? Yeah, there was a new tomb. In other words, Jesus was put in a fresh tomb.
No mistakes.
Yeah, like it was Joseph of Arimathea's garden in his tomb. And so the idea was he prepared this little gravesite for himself and his family. And he had it ready so they put Jesus there. But the point is, it wouldn't have been a giant stone. It would have been a small thing. And why would they put stones in front of it?
Animals.
Animals, well, also just the smell. You know, it was an act of honor and privacy. You closed it off and you let nature do its thing. But you also put the stone there to keep the animals out, because the animals will go in there and, have dinner. All right. So when it was done, then a body would just be, the bones would be gathered up and put in a small box, and then I think then they buried that box. Then maybe I'm not sure, but that was a fairly common custom. That's what they did, and the bodies were wrapped in a shroud, and they just sort of disintegrated, and then they would just take the towel and all the bones and take them out, and they would use the same space. But the tomb I was in, it seems to me like there were like 2 rooms in it, and there were spaces for more than one body. There were 2 rooms in it.
There's a very large section of Cairo that was all tombs.
Uh-huh.
And then after the War of 67, and all the Egyptians needed to find places to live after they'd been exiled from Israel,
Yeah.
they used the tombs.
They lived in the.
And that became
Yeah.
a whole new neighborhood.
Yeah.
Not exactly high-end, but
Right, and apparently underneath the Vatican, there's these things called the catacombs, where again, they would just take bodies of believers and they would hide them in the caves, and they would just rot away, and the bones are still there. That was burial. That was burial. They weren't embalmed as in preservation.
remember, it's hot.
It's hot, and they would just, do the thing. Okay, so that's what it looked like. But I may be the only one here who thought like this, but in my mind, I just thought it was more like Jesus, that he basically he would have been dead. He would have been dead 48 hours anyway, and that he just came back to life like a zombie and got off the table, and he walked around with whatever. And yet, if you just read the Gospels, you might think that. But when you start reading the appearance stories in the Gospels, you realize that that's not what it was. Why?
There's all the language of "don't touch me yet,"
Yeah.
because I'm not.
Yeah, something was going on, but also, think about the story of Doubting Thomas in the room that we read about. He could appear, Jim, thank you. Number one, he was hardly ever recognized. Almost every single time they didn't know, they just didn't recognize who it was. But also, what could this figure do?
Walk through walls.
It could walk through walls, lock doors, it could materialize and dematerialize. Remember the story of the supper at Emmaus? They're sitting at the table, blam, he was gone. Which says this is not the same thing as a resuscitated corpse. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing, all right? So, I don't know about you, but that's what I thought as a little boy, because I just didn't have any other concept otherwise, which always kind of was scary to me. Anyway, so
The thing that was never pointed out in any Sunday school class to me was the very first people who were told to preach the resurrection were females.
yes.
Nobody made a big deal
Yeah,
out of it.
women were the faithful ones. The men were hiding. Women were the ones that had the courage to go out to the tomb, to be identified as a follower of Jesus, to go to the tomb and try to do their thing, and then he met them and told them to go and tell, go and tell, go and tell. They were commissioned as the first evangelists. Later he said, you boys go do the same thing. But Cinda's right. The women were the first ones, the women saw it, and they were the first ones commissioned to go and tell. Joe, did you have your hand up?
I did. I find this also refreshing because I was raised as a good Catholic girl. And we did not have...
And we know that about you too. Go ahead. Sorry.
We did not have to read the Bible. I mean, and so it was just resurrection. I mean, you just changed. I mean, and that's, we were told it, and that. And then as time has gone on, and I've seen the light, and I've read more of the stories and the time, and I find it so refreshing, and I really like these thoughts, and especially the part about the women. But anyway, I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Now, this was a long time ago. I mean, Okay, my communion and my confirmation and all that stuff.
And there are plenty of people who've sat in church all their lives, and it really isn't clicking that, oh, these stories are a little different. Now for me, I come out of a Bible thumper tradition, but I don't find that problematic. I still believe, and I'll tell you what I believe about it, but just because the stories are a little different doesn't mean you just throw them all away. We're dealing with pre-scientific telling of history. It was all oral. These stories were put down on paper 30, 40 years after the whole thing happened anyway. John's gospel, maybe even longer. So keep that in mind. These are ancient people trying to preserve history the best way they could. Most of it was just word of mouth, right? So keep that in mind. That is often raised as a criticism. Scholarly 20th, 21st century people go, well, your stupid stories aren't even all the same. So why do you believe any of it if the stories aren't the same? And I'll tell you why I believe it, why I think a lot of other people have come to get out of our heads and get it down in your heart. So that's the first thing, that the stories are not exactly the same. There's stuff that's central to all of them, right? They know it was in the tomb, the women went there, the body was not there. So, next question is, so what are some of the theories about that body? Well, we heard one of them. In Matthew's gospel, he said, well, they paid the soldiers to tell everybody that his disciples came in the night and stole the body away. All right, that's somewhat plausible. And maybe that did or did not happen. But again, why would those 11 disciples and others, why would they put their lives on the line for a conspiracy, a lie that they all put together and knew it wasn't true? Why would they do that? Would you die for something like that? I would. If you knew that you'd squirreled it away and hid it, would you be willing to be crucified upside down? Which one of them? I can't remember which one. Peter? Wasn't he crucified upside down? I mean, would you be willing to be crucified upside down if you didn't truly believe, if you hadn't really experienced the risen Christ?
I would hope so.
Yeah. So that's one of the criticisms. The stories don't match. Or number two, well, the disciples, they came and took the body at night. There's another theory that says, well, the Romans did it, or the Jews did it. Somebody took it so that they couldn't monkey with it or something. They could hide it away or venerate it. Yeah, get it out of there. Just let's do away with this Jesus once and for all. Okay. One of the theories that, as I said, that I grew up with was, well, God just put life back in him, and so that the corpse on the table just got up and walked out. That's another theory.
But that's what happened to Lazarus. That's not what happened to Jesus.
Thank you. Because there are other stories of people being raised from the dead, and they do not have these elements or these appearance stories. I, for one, think Lazarus was probably in a coma-like state. What happened to Lazarus was not the same thing that happened to Jesus, but we equate them. And remember that the little girl that Jesus raised? Remember, you're dealing with ancient language. It probably means she was probably in a death-like state, or maybe she did actually die for a while. But it's not the same thing as this mysterious person and body-like thing that these people experienced, that could pass through walls and appear and disappear, and at the same time eat stuff, which is even weirder. And yet, all those guys were willing to die horrible deaths because they said they experienced it. And that's another thing, people. There were no witnesses to what happened inside the tomb, right? Not one eyeball saw it. Not one. What we have in Scripture are stories of appearances, which for me are quite convincing. Weird as all get out, but quite convincing. Okay. There's another theory. Anybody heard of this book called The Passover Plot? Yeah. This was written, I think, maybe in the 50s, but the theory behind this was that basically that Jesus worked with others to give the appearance of he was crucified, no doubt about it, but that, where it says they pierced his side, but they didn't break his feet, so that he went into the tomb almost dead, really sick, and they got his body away and got him back to good health, enough to live a little while longer and dare to appear to people, and then he died probably from his wounds. That's the story of the Passover. That's one of the theories of the Passover Plot. Very interesting book. Jane.
When Thomas was out and he said, put his hand into the spot.
Yeah.
How could that have?
That's the thing, Jane. These two guys, these two scholars, Morton Kelsey, he was an Episcopal priest and he also taught at the University of Notre Dame. He really restored my doubting faith a long time ago. But he, and also Shirley Guthrie, who's a Presbyterian scholar, the late Shirley Guthrie, they both say that what came forth, what appeared to these disciples and the other people, there's a story that like 300 or 400 people saw him all together or something like that. But that what appeared was not a body like I have or you have. It was not a dead body that came back to life. It was a physical spiritual body, a completely, utterly transformed, weird body. And so for people who will not even entertain the possibility of a non-material universe, that this is all there is, that is just pure silliness. But if you truly believe, as Jesus taught, that there's a non-material aspect to there's the material world, the physical world that we know, and the non-material world, that Jesus was participating in both, that he was a part of that glorified, he was the first fruit, as Paul said. He got this transformed body. A body that could eat fish and at the same time dematerialize and go and appear in rooms and dematerialize and walk through walls. And that blows your mind. And it's like, I don't get it. No, you can't. That's why I've always said I believe in heart religion. Park your brains. Now, these two guys will also, given quantum physics and all this other stuff that I can't even begin to understand, someday the stories in our Bible will not seem so far-fetched. They will not seem so far-fetched. Yeah. But again, the thing that causes me to trust is, number one, all of them were willing to die for it. They were willing to go out there and continue to preach his gospel of good news of God's grace and to die for doing it. But the other thing is that people like Paul and all of them, they experienced his spiritual presence to them. That he came to them and that he continues to come to us. And I know that some of you sitting in this room, we've had those bizarre, non-material, way out there experiences, some of us have, which convinces us that, no, I can't get my head around whatever happened in that tomb. But I believe that Jesus was raised as the Christ, that he's alive, and that he comes to us, and that he is present to us as spirit, and present to the world. That's where I stand on it. And I can't prove it. But also, someone said you can't disprove it either. You can't disprove it either. And so, rather than arguing about what happened in the tomb, the best thing is just to be his physical body in the world. And then count on him to empower us to continue that ministry, to be the people that help change the world. And we go on. And then we find that happens. That really does happen. Joe?
Do you think, or do you believe that once we die, and we go to the other side, or whatever you want to describe it, that we will know?
We will know.
And we will get answers?
I think some answers, but I think there's some things that won't matter anymore. But Joe, thank you for bringing that up, because let me say some things about that. Important thing to realize here is that what happened to Jesus is not the same thing as what happens to us when we bite the dust. Okay? I don't know how that's all going to work, but they said that a day will come. The church for a long time talked about the general resurrection of the dead, when you receive a new body. Now, I used to love to argue with my mother about this. This way, you can't cremate people because then they can't be raised. Well, the fact is that bodies will rot away in just a few months, and that they all did back then, or that if you went to the bottom of the sea, or if you were in a fire or whatever, your body was destroyed. There'll be new bodies. You'll look different. Remember, Jesus, they didn't even recognize who he was. They're different. So what happens, Joe? I think immediately our spirit passes into the non-material reality. But the idea that we have at that moment the same weird body that Jesus had, no, I don't think that happens just yet. That's God's problem to manage at some point. But it's promised. It is promised. In fact, do you all know that before really the Pharisees, the whole idea of life in a new body was really not present to the Jews like it is to us. In fact, the Sadducees, that was one of the premises of their sect, that it doesn't say anything in the first 5 books of the Bible about life beyond death. When you die, you die. Whatever blessings and good things happen in this world, and then you're dead, and that's it. Later on, concepts of life, some kind of life and existence beyond death, started to emerge. And the Pharisees, believe it or not, were big proponents of it. And they talked a lot about the resurrection of in fact, they asked Jesus a question about it, remember? So if you're married to 3 different wives, which one is your wife and the and you big dummies. That's not what we're talking about. It's a different kind of existence.
But the Jews were kind of adopting a lot of the Greek philosophy, about even what they did to Jesus' body. The Jews would put it in the ground within 24 hours and not touch it. They were starting to adopt this thing that we'll leave it in a tomb, let it rot, store the bones later. I mean, that's not Jewish. That's more of a Greek thing, because nowadays the Jewish people don't do that. They get in the ground right away.
And I think you're probably right, John, but where I think more and more scholars think probably a lot of it came from was the, what's the name of the group? The oldest religion. The astrologers that came to
Zoroastrians.
The Zoroastrians. Yeah, that the Zoroastrians had concepts of life after death, heaven, hell, the whole thing.
We got it from the Egyptians, because there's that weird passage where when they were fleeing Egypt, they took Joseph's body. Was he who's the one they made Pharaoh?
They brought his bones back.
Yeah, they brought his bones, because it seemed like he was mummified.
Yeah.
Which
Could
was
be,
kind of-
they probably mummified him.
That he was mummified like the rulers of Egypt, or they brought
Well,
his
and he was a ruler of Egypt, but
body back.
I think the concepts of afterlife, part of them probably crept into the Jewish faith about that time, and probably
And just
From
a
them.
fun side note, they were doing this of, laying the body and keeping the bones. That in England, they used to keep your skull and your thigh bones. Why were they keeping your thigh bones? Well, you had to have them to rise up. On the day of the resurrection, you had to have your thighs to rise up, so they kept some of your bone, those bones.
Practically, in Egypt today, if you die, your service is before nightfall because there's no embalming, even among Christians. So we have friends who couldn't make it back from Upper Egypt to Cairo for their own parents' funerals because they happened so fast.
what's scary is, can you imagine the people who may have not quite been dead and buried alive? And that's real, people. That stuff is real.
Well, that was a big, scary, George Washington instructed them, don't bury me for 3 days, because he was scared, like a lot of people in the late
Yeah, people were buried alive. That's what a wake is, to be to wake and watch.
Yeah.
Like, make sure they're dead. Somebody's going to say something. Steve.
I'm going to say something provocative.
Okay, do it.
I'm not sure the end of the Gospels are really about the resurrection. I think that's different.
Yeah.
I think it's about what happens to people after.
Right. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, it's about who then takes the first communion with Jesus, i.e. the church, and says, did we not see him? At the communion. It's about the first people who he finally says their name. You think, what's going to happen in heaven? Perhaps the way I will recognize that I'm in front of my Lord is he will say, Steve. It's about John, that's who it was, where I was. I just think there's a whole lot of transitory stuff, transition stuff in this. It's all about faith and believing and what that encounter motivates you to do for the next 20 centuries.
And the first people who are hearing this, because most of them did not read.
Right.
This was being heard in fellowship.
Or stories, verbal stories. I want to end with something. Joe, you brought up a question at our last time, and you said, what about that weird line in the Apostles' Creed where it says he descended into hell? Where's that come from? So I did a little research.
The Methodists don't say.
Well, they're wrong.
Some conservative Presbyterians, Mr. Brewer did not say, your father did not say that.
Well, first of all, so here's where it comes from. There's 3 or 4 places in Paul's writings where Paul alludes to the time while Jesus' body is reposing in the tomb, that his spirit went into the non-material universe and went to a place, not like hell. First of all, we need to get hell. Hell, as we understand today, did not exist in people's minds back then. It was a place it was like the underworld. It was like the place where spirits went and they waited for the resurrection. They waited for a chance to be judged, to live again. And that in some of those places, it was places of torment for some, and others, like Lazarus. Remember the terrible parable of Lazarus. So Paul alludes to this and says that while his body was reposing in the tomb, his spirit went to those places and he started ministering to the lost souls. And the Eastern Orthodox, to this day, whenever you see, or not whenever, but often when you see Eastern Orthodox artwork about the crucifixion, the resurrection, the tomb, and all that, somewhere in there is Jesus in that non-material reality we're tormented, maybe like Judas, who could not even forgive himself and could not believe that that Jesus went there and, as it says, preached to the captives. I love that. And then he went there and he started pulling them out. And there's a fancy theological name, the something of hell. What's it called? The harrowing of hell. That's what Jesus did while his body reposed in the tomb. That he went into this place, not the fiery place of torment, but this place of agony where people needed the healing and the rescue of God. And he went there and he started cleaning the mess out. I love that.
Was that in one of our hymns today, the harrowing? No.
It's in some of them though, but yeah. So Joe, I answered your question. That's how it made its way into the Apostles' Creed. He descended into hell. A better word is probably Hades than hell. Because when we say hell, we all think of Dante and Dante's Inferno. That is not what the Pharisees believed or anybody else. It was a place, an in-between world where everybody went. And some went there toting their baggage of deep regret and shame and sin. And others went there happy and released and hoping for a new body and a new world. Jesus went there and preached to the souls that were captive. I think that's beautiful. So I have no problem. Jesus descended into hell. And there he did great work.
Is purgatory just a Catholic phrase?
Yes. But purgatory comes from that. It comes, unfortunately, purgatory turned into also a place of minor torment.
And merit.
I think of purgatory, here's my Protestant, don't tell anybody. This is my Protestant version of purgatory. I truly believe that there is a place, like an emergency room on the other side, where people like Judas and others are, and where Christ or angels or ministering spirits meet them and work with them and try to bring them into wholeness. That does not, but please nobody leave and say that Jim is a universalist. I'm not saying that. But I don't think, as my Baptist Sunday school teachers and preachers always, once dead, the judgment. I'm not convinced of that.
Do you like limbo better?
No, because limbo implies you're just nothing. I believe that for those souls that are tormented in this world, they take it to the next, and there they're met. And the Christ starts ministering to them and hopefully yanking them to a different place.
So going with your sermon today, it's like a second chance.
I really do believe that. I really do.
That was a
believe
really good sermon.
that. Thank you. But I do believe that with all my heart.
Has the modern day Catholic Church changed their views?
I honestly don't know.
It
Joel. I don't know.
depends who you talk to. When I did my first year of undergrad, I had a Jesuit professor who was a good friend of mine and was a big deal with my growing in faith. And the things that I learned from him were not experiences, my Catholic friends got on Sunday school. But I mean, it was, but we're talking about like we did today about, the historical, what probably happened at the tomb and everything. This stuff going through the Gospels was some of the stuff we primarily hit, and like if for them, they were focused on archaeology and everything a lot, and they didn't think that it was as likely that the authorities would have removed Jesus from the tomb, because that would have created an incident that they did not want to have to deal with.
That would have made it more
that made it much worse on them. They're like, no, leave him in the tomb, and after enough time, people will forget about him. That would have been the thing to do at that time. So that was actually the Jesuit argument against the authorities.
And I'm thinking, Joel, of people like Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan Catholic, and he's come to embrace more the Eastern Orthodox idea that when we talk about evil being defeated, I'll give you my take on that. Well, I might as well while I'm up here. When we talk about Jesus destroyed, we sang about it. with the cross and with thine is the glory. And Christians sing about evil being defeated. And anybody with eyeballs can look around and know that there is still evil in the world, right? We're witnessing, right? But here's what I believe about it. I believe that somehow or another, as a result of that resurrection, that we are empowered ourselves. We are given power to resist evil and overcome it. We don't have to succumb to it. Which makes me wonder what life was like before the Spirit and Pentecost and Jesus and Christ. What was that like? But I believe that Jesus really did defeat the power of evil. It's still in operation, but to defeat the power of evil over us. All right, that's what I believe that. That's my take on what happened. Other questions or comments? I probably scrambled your brains, and maybe that's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Well, thank you all for bearing with me. Again, let it go here. Get it out, because most of you guys are left-brainers. I know you are. Don't know why. Most of you are left-brainers. Just get it out of there. Just let it live in your heart, because it's not. You're not going to figure it out. Okay? Have yourselves a fabulous, warm day.